Welcome back to Career Tea, the podcast where we spill the tea on real stories behind careers you don't hear enough about. I'm your host, Sohrab, and today's guest has a career journey that is a masterclass in strategy, data, and continuous growth. With a background in applied mathematics from UCLA, she's forged a path from a diverse internships at places like the District Attorney's Office to leading product management at some of the world's largest financial institutions. She's worked at American Express and Capital One and has now taken her career to the next level as a senior product manager for Open Banking and A2A Solutions at Visa. I'm thrilled to have her here today to unpack her journey, her day-to-day, and the lessons she's learned along the way. Serena, welcome to Career Tea.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Of course. Thank you for being here. Your career is very impressive. And so I want to dive a little bit into understanding what you do now in your role and also learn a little bit about how you've gotten there and gather a little bit of insight and knowledge. You've recently taken a major step. You transitioned from your time at Capital One to a new senior role as a product manager for Open Banking Solutions at Visa. And I know you've recently started that within the past month, so it's very fresh, very new. But can you break down what this new role has entailed so far and what the typical day looks like for you at Visa?
Yeah. So I'm working, like you said, on the Open Banking and A2A Solutions. A2A means account to account. So what that entails is account to account payments are something that have started to take off in the UK, greatly enabled by the faster payments system that's used here. But the thing with that is, and you've probably seen this if you've used something like Zelle, you send your money and it's gone. There's no protection of like, I sent that to the wrong person or anything like that, in the way that if you put it on a card, you have the ability to charge back or detect for fraud. So as use cases for A2A scale, there's this gap that Visa has identified in saying that for instant payments like that, there's customer hesitation that you send your money and it's gone. And even on the bank and merchant side, then if someone tries to refute that, there's a liability on them to fulfill that and remedy. So Visa kind of saw the opportunity to step in there and use the expertise that they have from being a network for so many markets in so many years to bring that protection to the faster payment system here. So I am joining pretty early on in this journey. We are specifically taking the product to market in the UK. I'm joining 2 months ahead of us going live and working with our first clients. And so it's a really exciting time to be on the team. Stepping into a new role. I've been at Capital One and Amex before, so always been on the like bank and issuing side and working directly with customers. And so being in this more in between spot where we are ultimately serving the end customer like you and I, but working directly with banks or payment initiators is a completely different world, and kind of shifting mental models the last few weeks to adjust.
That's awesome. It sounds like a very fascinating and complex role. And as you mentioned, it sounds like you're right before heading some, maybe hectic but exciting times and huge career milestones as well. As you mentioned, before you joined Visa, you had a fantastic track to manager position at Capital One. What was that experience like? And what do you believe were the key differences in responsibility and mindset that allowed you to go and advance so quickly from your senior associate role at Capital One to manager there? And like, what were like the differences of like day-to-day responsibilities at work there?
Yeah. So I was at Capital One for a little bit under 3 years. And in that, I always say like 3 different jobs, even though I had 2 titles, and always just a product manager by title. So I joined on an accounts payable teams. The broad organization that I was in at Capital One was our business cards and payments team. So focused on small business card customers, but specifically in what we called beyond the cards, all of the products aside from the card that would help us strengthen the relationship with the customer for different services beyond just here's your credit card and you can swipe it. So the way that Capital One entered that realm of things was with accounts payable. So I joined that team in 2022. The product was an in-house solution that they were building, and it was kind of in beta. They brought a bunch of us on to like scale. At the beginning of 2023, they ended up deciding to pivot to a partner strategy for accounts payable. So by way of that reorg, they took 6 of us and put us on what was positioned as a strategy incubator type team to say, okay, Capital One has kind of started in the beyond the card space with accounts payable. What are the other ways that we can play in this beyond the card space? What makes sense as a bank to offer things?
Mm-hmm.
What are our customers asking for? So spent about a year doing purely strategy. I was used to say I was product manager without a product because we were just looking at the market and seeing like what makes sense. And that was really cool to, talk to a bunch of partners to see, okay, if we're looking at offering like a money management solution or different things like that, like who are the fintechs we might want to work with or how might we want to implement that. And so got to see kind of how that world works in terms of putting out an RFP and looking for just like different facets of a partner that are important and how to enable that. And then at the beginning of 2024, we then pivoted to open banking at Capital One. And so for my last year and a half there, was working on expanding the use of open banking at Capital One for our business card customers. And so where were the use cases where we could get customers to connect? And the open banking landscape is so different in the US, especially. And so that was kind of my first taste of like just understanding how that worked and why we would want customers to connect and share their data. So what I led in my last year and a half there was introducing the open banking connection at the time of payment. So
Mm-hmm.
you could have seen in like a Venmo or PayPal situation, but instead of typing in your bank credentials, you're logging in with your bank login. That allows us to have your payment details and saves you the ease of having to go find your routing number.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely a journey. And I think just the switch, even though it wasn't my choice,
Mm-hmm.
all of those times, like Capital One is very intentional about how they, even with reorgs and changing strategic priorities, how they place people. And so I think all of those were good for me to kind of stretch different skills.
Yeah, I guess from what I'm hearing is that like Capital One, kind of moves with intention of like their employees' career growth, right?
Hmm.
Now on that topic, how would you describe, I guess, the work environment of Capital One? Like the teams that you worked with, what's that work environment like? What are the hours like that you worked? And I believe you worked in New York, right? New York City.
Yeah,
So
I
what's that
worked in New
environment
York.
like working like a major financial institution like Capital One?
Capital One operates fully like a tech company. Every year, the CEO does what's called strategy weeks instead of companies that do like town halls quarterly. Capital One CEO Richard Fairbank does 4 days of pure strategy, and he's founded the company, but the way that he is so in the weeds with the company strategy is so cool to see. And especially of those 4 days that you sit and listen to him, 2 full days generally are on the technology and how we advance and how,
Yeah.
we bring things up to the current market and how we use AI was like a big focus of recently, the last session. So I think that, yes, I worked at a really big bank, but I felt like I was running at a tech company. And the culture reflected that. Like there was flexibility in, and trust in you get your work done and your hours are not your chain to a laptop because we're saying you have to be here from 9 to 5. Some days it's longer, some days it's a little bit shorter, or you can, step out for lunch. And that's actually one thing is like lunch hour was blocked off for
Nice.
everyone. And so it was a really great culture to work in, especially when you're in the office and everyone's off at 12 and can go sit and chat together. And especially that strategy team that I worked on, like that brought me very, very close to my coworkers. They're still like some of my best friends because we were just sitting and whiteboarding in a room for hours. And so that definitely was a bonding experience, but definitely very like as a company tech forward, which is really cool to feel like you're in a role at like a big tech firm, but still in the financial services space. And then just generally, like the people are so warm and welcoming. People stay for like 15, 20 years. And honestly, I would have loved to say if they had a presence in the UK, like I absolutely love the team and the culture there, but very flexible.
Wow, that's awesome. It's good to hear that how much focus they have on, I guess, employees' time. Because you hear a lot of times with financial institutions, especially in New York, how like cutthroat it could be, how hours can be, very demanding. But it's good to hear that Capital One really focuses on, for example, giving you your lunch hour, blocking that off. And you mentioned that now you're in UK and Capital One doesn't have as big of a presence there as it does here. So before we move forward, and again, I know you've only been there for a month, but what's the difference of the work environment at Visa now in London versus, Capital One in New York City? A lot of times I feel like I hear that in the UK or in Europe maybe that the work is more relaxed. So I want to hear it from you. What's your experience been so far in the past month?
So I think that if I worked at the typical New York firm that you probably are imagining, it would have been a stark change. Because I came from Capital One where it was so flexible. Honestly, the culture feels very, very similar here. Um, Everyone in the this is like 2 weeks since I joined, everyone has been so warm and so welcoming. Same kind of thing where honestly, across all the companies that I've been at, Capital One, Amex, and now Visa, everyone just seems like they're there to help you and like will set up time to have a coffee chat and um, very open to asking a million questions when you're onboarding or even after. And so I felt that during the interview process with Visa, and I've definitely seen that in the last few weeks.
It's awesome. Now, taking a step back, before you joined Capital One, you were a product management analyst at American Express. You were also recognized 3 times by senior leaders there. So I want to understand what your experience was at Amex and how you feel like it set you up for your success at Capital One and now at Visa. And how do you go about getting recognized so many times by senior leaders at a company? That there could be a good lesson there for younger, employees right now at that company or any company really.
Yeah. My time at Amex was so I actually started there as an intern between my junior and senior year. And in college, I honestly went with the applied math major because I was like, it's applicable in a lot of places, and I don't really know where I want to go with it. I knew I really liked math, and kind of thinking very logically was something that came pretty natural. Most of college, I thought that I was going to be data science or data analytics, and that's what I originally interned at Amex for. So I was on the risk team, but doing more like data stuff in my internship, got a return offer, and the way that the return works at Amex is you get a return to your broader organization. So I got a return to risk, but not necessarily to your direct team. And so when it came time to like place me onto my full-time role, I was offered a product management role. And at the time when I graduated college, the only PM roles I knew of outside of college and initial stages were like Google or Meta, and you had to have a CS background and you had to be super technical. And that was just not where I was coming from. And so I was like, okay, I'll try it out. Like I always envisioned being data science for a few years, then maybe moving into PM. So this kind of does that earlier for me. And I always say, like, people will call me and ask me, like, especially in college, like, how did you get into it? Like, any tips for me? And I had a really great mentor who just kind of saw through my internship that I had the ability to translate between technical and non-technical. And he was like, I think you'd be well suited to try the PM team. So he placed me on there, joined that team. And I think honestly, a big reason why I got the recognition that I did was that I joined a team, and my boss, who is incredible and who I still talk to and helped me prep for my visa interviews, she was a director at the time and I was an analyst. And so like generally there's a couple people in between those roles, but I was directly reporting to her. And so it was kind of like, you take this and run. And honestly, it taught me so much because I just had a lot of responsibility really early on. And had to just learn the fundamentals of product and learn how to get up to speed really quickly, how to just not be afraid of asking questions because you just kind of have to take it and run. So I think that was really instrumental for me to just kind of learn how to do product in like a general sense, but also how to like get into the weeds with things. Like my manager at the time was really a strong believer in knowing the technical details, like even if you weren't responsible for it. And that's one thing that was different with the Amex PM role is that you didn't actually work directly with the tech team. Whereas like in general, PM, you will have that. So even though that wasn't in my day-to-day responsibility, she was like, you should, know the architecture, know the technical details. And I think that was also like a big differentiator.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think like a couple big lessons here. One, it's so important to have like a good mentor and a leader, especially like early on in your career. As you mentioned, you still talk to her and she still like mentors you
Yeah.
and helps you. That's awesome. And then The other is just taking on as much responsibility as you can earlier on, learn as much as you can. Because I guess like the more you built up, the more responsibilities you take on, as much as it might feel overwhelming earlier on, it will definitely benefit you, down the line.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so you've also had a really interesting experience at Amex with an initiative called PM 2.0 that I read
Hmm.
about, where you collaborated with senior leaders to transform the product management role to better align with industry standards and increase colleague retention. Can you talk a little bit about what that initiative meant, what it did, and what kind of impact does it have today?
Yeah. So PM 2.0 was something that was spearheaded by my VP at the time. And it was very specific to the risk product org. And the context I'll give there is like, as a PM, you walk into any tech company, you are owning strategy, you're owning the tech components of actually working directly with engineers. And then you're just like representing all parties in the business kind of case there. The difference with risk product at Amex was that the tech side of things, like I mentioned, was owned by someone else. There was a product owner. So kind of like that core responsibility was not in the PM title. And then the strategy aspect of it was also owned by another team. And so and for good reason, like we're deciding to extend credit. There's people who spend their full day and day in and day out do that and have the expertise there. So they were driving the strategy.
Hmm.
But then I think what started to come up for a lot of people who had the PM title was like, hey, the tech component is in someone else's role and the strategy component is in someone else's role. So where is their leverage as a PM to really like flex your skills? And so I think that led to a little bit of attrition, a little bit of just like feedback of people just wanting to see how to further define the role. And so that's where this initiative came from of like, okay, where are the opportunities to empower people? What is the feedback saying? And so it was, I think it was over the course of like 6 months of really drawing on a lot of feedback, just trying to
Hmm.
gather where people were looking for change and then also where there was leverage to make change, given that these all, you weren't upsetting like three types of job families, but where
Yeah.
you could kind of leverage different things. So I think that there was change in the way that we gave ownership to PMs, especially in terms of like working with the strategy teams of saying like, okay, yes, they're owning the criteria for how we make a decision, but like that translating that to tech and making sure that things get prioritized accordingly and those core fundamentals of being a PM sit really within the product team. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, so shifting a little bit of responsibilities, taking the feedback. And as far as I know from everyone that I've heard who's still there, it's doing well, but yeah, it's been a couple years. So I don't know the current
Yeah.
status.
No, that's awesome. That's a great example of being a leader at every level. So now let's rewind a little bit even farther back to your time in undergrad at UCLA. As you mentioned, you graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Applied Mathematics. One, I want to hear, can you tell me a little bit about what was your experience like at UCLA? What's that school like? What was that program like? And would you recommend the school to students that are, in high school looking to go to school? And would you also recommend mathematics as an undergrad degree? And that kind of goes hand in hand with the question of if you went back to school, would you study mathematics again or would you choose a different major with what you know now today?
Yeah. So on the note of UCLA, I absolutely loved it. I am so thankful that I went there. And I cannot say better things. So yes, I would definitely recommend UCLA. Um, I think that one of the biggest things I beyond the classes and beyond the experience I had at UCLA, like I'm a big proponent of state schools in the sense of like anyone you talk to who went to UCLA, like you had to advocate for yourself. You had to, if you didn't get into a class, it was like, okay, how do you work your schedule around it? Because you don't have advisors for hundreds of thousands of kids or tens of thousands of kids looking over your shoulder at every step. It's like you really have to make your path and make sure you're on track. And I think that like that's a really great lesson, especially going into the real world to
Hmm.
know that you have to take ownership of things. Um, so definitely a proponent of that. I think I would pick the applied math major again. I walked in knowing that I wasn't going to be doing proofs my whole life. And, I wasn't disillusioned about that. But I think that one of the fundamental skills that I took from that, and I think I use, is just like thinking about things and breaking down a problem logically and getting from point A to point B, and having the plan to do so, which, especially in product, you work in a lot of white space where you have to find a solution, or you have, we want to do better for our customers. What does that mean? Right. And so, like, problems like that, which are so open ended, I think having the background that I do helps me to think through that and structure it. Not to say that's the only way to do it, but I think that is like the biggest component that I take from the applied math degree. And also just interesting topics like learning the math behind machine learning. Like, that was one of my like most interesting classes. So I would definitely think I would do it again.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's good to hear that because I feel like when I was in, high school and choosing majors, I would hear it a lot, even in college. Like, I would hear a lot that people would be like, "Why would I study math?" Unless you were going to like be like an engineer, let's say, they would be like, "What would I use math for, like in real world?" But like now that I've grown older and I learn about all these other roles, type of jobs, I'm like, wow, like there's a lot of math being used.
Hmm.
But with that being said, if you were to switch your major, or like let's say there's a student right now that's interested in your career path, but they're not really interested in taking applied mathematics, right? They're not really into taking math classes, but they're interested in your career path, the roles that you've held at your past companies and your current company. What other majors do you think that would fit well to kind of be in line for the career path that you're in now?
Yeah, I think that it definitely helps to have a technical background. I came from a math background, but I didn't come from like a coding background. I'd done a couple of basic classes. So honestly, a CS background I think is helpful just in the ways of like, I always say to people of like, you might not be coding, you might be in the code at a smaller firm. And I know friends who have like worked at startups that you're actually reviewing code. But generally as a PM, you're not getting that technical. However, if you have a business ask or something that you want to build, you want to be able to talk to your engineers and know that it's something feasible and not be like, we have to do this and make this thing. And they're going to look like you're crazy if you have not grounded in anything technical and in what's feasible. So I think having that type of background definitely helps. So potentially a CS, even something like data science, I think could be interesting because there is kind of like the business analytics component that really does tie into like, what's the opportunity, especially when you're thinking about the early on strategy of a product. So I would say like those are all adjacent teams that could translate into product.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think I remember, I think it was, might have been Steve Jobs who said something like the best project managers are the ones that are like independent technical workers that don't want to be project managers and they don't want to really be responsible for managing people, but they're the best manager essentially because they understand the technical expertise and they understand what, the devices or the solutions need to, what technical solutions they need. So that completely makes sense.
Exactly.
And so while you were a student at UCLA, you had a incredibly varied set of internships from a legal consulting firm to a genetic lab and a startup. So what motivated you to seek out these diverse range of experiences and how did you attain them? And do you think that having those kind of wide range of experience at internships was beneficial for your career path? And would you still do those same type of internships going back?
Yeah. So to start with the genetics lab, I went into college thinking I was going to be a biology and math double major. And so by way of that was looking for something technical but related to kind of the bio aspect. So that's where that lab came from. We were just looking at, I think it was like mRNA. Honestly, now it feels like so far away. But yeah, it was like getting to practice the technical skills and also be in a like life sciences environment. So um, that was really interesting. I think like in the sense of the work itself maybe wasn't the most engaging, but in enlightening, I think, me to know what I wanted, and like know that I don't really love working in a lab environment and I like, being in more of a corporate setting. So I think that was definitely interesting. And then I also think I realized how from that I didn't need to have the bio background to necessarily work in something technical.
Hmm.
At the time, I also was just like, okay, like that would help me in like a biotech or whatever type role. And while I don't discount that that could be helpful, I didn't think it was like necessary after going through that internship. And so into my sophomore year, I was kind of like, okay, I think I just want to go more all in the applied math side of things. And so I mean my major switch, and then looking to my next internship. I mean, anyone in college probably knows, like, until that junior year internship, which is like, I feel like the big pinnacle, and especially for companies, it's a big like recruiting pipeline. Your freshman and sophomore year are kind of iffy if you're going to get something because
Hmm.
not all companies offer that. And so, um, got connected to someone who worked at the DA, and they generally take like law interns. I was the only like technical intern there, but they were like, we have this crime strategies unit, and essentially what they do is use crime data to like essentially geolocate like where hotspots would be. So that was what I worked on, and it sounds a lot cooler than it was. It was like in Excel like half the day. But I think one thing that I just took from that is the applicability of my like math and just technical skills across the board, which is a lot of the reason why I decided to go with the applied math major, is thinking that it could be applied in various scenarios. So I think that was validated. And I think just also that was such a lesson in really just jumping in and doing whatever you can. And,
Yeah.
um, like it might not be in your job description, but just kind of like do it because I was the only like technical intern, like I wasn't following any like step path. And so they would give me things and they'd be like, okay, then do you want to try this and that? And so I think those kind of things just helped me to learn of like it's just a good way to succeed in any job setting is put your hand up as long as you have the bandwidth to do so. Um, and then, just try different things.
Yeah, that's awesome. Again, taking responsibilities and just doing things, learning new things. So, you are a very high achieving, high performing individual, and you've worked at some of the biggest names, biggest companies, and you've held leadership positions. Where do you draw inspiration and like motivation from? Is there a book or a resource, or is there a podcast you listen to? Like, what drives you every day and keeps you motivated to kind of keep performing at such high level?
That's a great question. I think that I've always just kind of I think in school you're kind of conditioned to it, right? So like I think that was a lot of my early years was striving for good grades and striving, you have those like milestones that you want to hit. And I think the post college years and in my working time, it's just really been driven by like I want to be interested in what I'm doing every day. And in college when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, one of the biggest things that I would always say, and I would have so many networking calls and people would be like, oh, like, what do you know? What do you think your role is going to be? And my standard kind of response was like, I don't know yet. And I'm figuring that out. But what I do know is that I want to work on something that makes an impact on the customer. And that has really kind of been my driving force of like what I want to seek out. And I've actually like, I think that has helped me also find meaning in being in like the finance space because I kind of alluded to it, but like I always thought I wanted to be in health tech, and I knew that the math major could gonna kind of go anywhere. So when I applied for my junior year internship, I did like kind of spread across the board. Ended up at Amex. When I moved to Capital One, I was like, I can't believe I'm going to another financial services company. And now I've made my rounds to Visa. But I kind of realized at Capital One, like, especially I was working in the small business space, and like yes, healthcare is one way to make an impact. And I think that's like something super interesting. And maybe down the line we'd go back into that kind of realm. But also, money is part of every aspect of society.
Yeah.
And especially working in the small business side of things, it really showed me that like there's someone's livelihood that you're working with, and especially working on, solutions for smaller businesses who really might not know how to handle their financials or like might need an extension of credit was just a lesson in okay, like that is the impact that I want to make. And so those are the kind of opportunities that I've sought out. I mean, and that's not to say that every day you feel like you're changing the world, but I think that is the like overarching thing that I've been like looking for in whatever role I take.
Yeah, like the bigger picture, I guess.
Yeah.
A lot of times, like in the past, I guess I don't hear it often now, but in the past, you would hear it even from interviewers. They'll be like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? As I started working professionally after graduating school, I started to realize like you don't necessarily have an exact idea of where you see yourself in 5 years, and you kind of go from role to role, or maybe you have ideas of what companies you might want to work for, but sometimes, you just take opportunities that come along. I
Yeah.
want to understand, like, how do you see that saying of like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Have you, when you started your first role to your second role to Capital One, now to Visa, are you just kind of seeking out opportunities and as they come, you kind of grasp those opportunities? Or do you look at your, timeline and be like, I want to be here in 3 years, I want to be here in 5 years? And I understand that you said, it depends on the type of role, the type of impact you're going to make. But how does it work for you? Do you look forward, or do you see yourself, somewhere in 2, 3 years?
I don't actually plan too far in advance. I don't think like if you told me I would be living in the UK and working at Visa a year ago, I would have been like, no. So I don't really plan too far in advance. I guess just like to take you through the thought process of how I've made my moves.
Yeah.
I like I said, I was kind of placed into this product role soon after college. Um, I, around my 1 year mark, got reached out to by Capital One. And I had a mentor who was saying, it's good to interview every year because you keep your skills sharp, and you also know your value in the market. And so when this recruiter reached out to me, that was honestly the vein that I was like entering into it. I was like, it'll be practice. And also because I had been placed just onto this team. I never interviewed in a product scope. And
Mhm.
so my motivation was just like at any point, even if at that point, I was like, I'll be at Amex for a while. And I
Yeah.
was just like, even if I move into another role at Amex, I'm going to have to interview for a product role. And so I'll just take this as practice. And so that was a mentality. I wasn't looking. I went into Capital One, did the interview process completely in my mind as practice, and then ended up with the offer that I decided to take. So that was not planned at all. And I'll also say, like, I was visiting a friend in London at the time and took that recruiter call from her couch, and I hung up and I said, I don't think I would move. I wouldn't leave Amex. Like, I've only been here a year. And then a month later was switching jobs. So definitely didn't plan for that. And then the internal moves at Capital One were all kind of like by way of like org shifts. This was the first move that I've made in my career that has been really intentional, motivated by the fact that I have wanted to move abroad for a while. And so wanted to see like where that made sense, and kind of because I was working in the open banking space and that is something that's pretty developed out here, it felt like a good opportunity to kind of pull that thread and see where I could like develop a niche in coming out here and seeking out opportunities. So that's where I started to like network and make my way over here early this year. But I would say I decided that like 2025 was going to be the year in December. So maybe like a 6 month lead time
Yeah.
to when I got my offer. Um, yeah, so I wouldn't say I plan too far in advance.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, I think you just gotta take it one step at a time, do the right thing, and opportunities will come along. Now, before I go to my last question, let me ask you a couple questions. Is the UK, now that you've been there for a month, is it as rainy as they say it is? I've never been to the UK, but you always hear that it's rainy or like the weather's always bad. Is that true, or is it nice weather?
So I've been here, I got here July 31st, since August 19th. So probably like 3 weeks. It has rained twice.
Okay.
So it's been really nice. I know that is the summer. So I do know I've been here in the winters and I do know it gets rainy, but so far we've been okay.
That's perfect. You've gotten lucky. The other question is another thing that I hear, and I need to know if it's true or not. People always say that, people in the UK and London love eating beans with like their meals, especially like breakfast too. Is that true? Is that a thing?
It is. I didn't actually know that till I was moving here and people would ask me if I was going to eat that. I have not yet tried it, but it is on the menu.
Yeah, I hear it's a big thing. Now to my last question and the most important question. For students who are graduating school soon, or young professionals who have just started their career, in a similar field or in the field of product management, one piece of advice would you have for them, or potentially for your younger self, if you could give advice to yourself?
Yeah. There's so many ways I could go with this. Can I do two?
You could do too, yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. I will say that in terms of product, I know that it's a very like hot name to have on your resume and field that people want to go into. I don't think that you can only get product experience with the title of being a PM. I think like the two most translatable skills from other roles is communication and stakeholder management. And those really go hand in hand, just being able to work on a team to communicate what you want to push forward, and just being really clear in that. I think you can get in other roles. And I think that then translates to eventually when you do become a PM, having a strong foundation. Um, and then the second thing that like I kind of am motivated by is just that like everything is always changing. And so I've had periods where I didn't love what I was working on. And then 2 months later, things were so much better. So I think you can take that in the fact of like, something might not be your ideal. Your first job might not be your ideal and you could get reorged and that could change, or like you can make that change. And so I would say like to anyone entering out of school, like you might not have that dream job right away, or it might not be the PM title, but there's ways you can one, draw on your experiences to eventually get there, and two, just like find comfort in the fact that things will keep changing.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are excellent advice. Serena, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on Career Tea today. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and incredible insights with us. I know that you're going to make amazing impact on everywhere you go. So I hope to stay in touch with you and see how your career unfolds, what other leadership positions you take, and hopefully have you back on Career Tea again in the future.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for having me.